And Jim Lloyd and I went to Newport Island together, and we took about 3 weeks to get out there to make a nice leisurely trip. My mother had a second cousin whose husband was dean of the School of Pharmacy at Northwestern University. So then we doodled down over to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware and worked our way up and out to Cape Cod and then back to Newport in time to start school for OCS. And then at OCS, as she started getting done, you had options. You could go surface warfare, submarine warfare, UDT, at that time that's the previous group of the SEALs, or aviation, or intelligence. So I had wanted to be a Navy pilot, but my eyes weren't good enough, and I couldn't pass the test. So I chose EOD, and it used to be SWD, Special Weapons. I got the articles over there that show it. So I was 5 weeks in Key West at underwater swim school. Same time as Scott Carpenter, John Glenn, and those guys came down there a couple weeks after I was in.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's a long time ago. The astronaut group came down there to go through underwater swim school. That was 5 weeks. We did a lot of ocean training, pool training, swam out to the Dry Tortugas, the old Civil War prison, looked around. We had a lot of fun. And then back to Indian Head for weapons school. At the same time, after a couple of months there, a bunch of us Navy people decided we wanted to go through hard hat training. So we went up to the Naval Gun Factory, which was just up where the Anacostia and the Potomac come together in Washington, D.C. And there's 4 levels of deep sea diving. You got second class diver, that's hard hat, but beginning hard hat. And then you got first class, master, and salvage. Well, because we might need to do some hard hat diving, we just did second class. And then back to Indian Head, more ordnance classes. And then we went to Eglin Air Base for rigging and digging. You know where Eglin is? Next to Pensacola, just northwest there, across from Fort Walton Beach. And we stayed at the officers' BOQ there in Fort Walton Beach, right on the beach. It's beautiful. And we were down there for 3 weeks for rigging and digging. There's where we go out in their bombing range and find the hole in the ground and then figure out the catenary, the angle that it dug in, and if there was no explosion, the ground would be undisturbed. So we had to calculate where the bomb was. Then we'd dig and rig it just like you would an outdoor toilet, with planks down to how deep it was, and then defuse it, usually with a rocket wrench. And after we got done with that, went back to Indian Head and did a couple of months of special weapons training, which nuclears. And from there we went to Kirtland in Albuquerque for a couple of weeks of advanced nuclear. I don't know if you're familiar with Nukies or not, but Nukies originally were either gun type, like Little Boy, or Fat Man, which is gun type. You have an explosive at one end, you force the nuclear material together and form the bomb. Fat Boy is an implosion weapon. It looks like a geodesic dome. It's got triangles all over with a fuse at each angle, and it's got PETN explosive about 3 inches. And then when you set it off, all of those go at the same time and force implosion on the plutonium in the center. So went through that, and then back to Indian Head. And then we were reassigned. I was assigned to the Bennington, and I had to fly to San Francisco and go and catch a MATS flight to Hawaii. It was in Hawaii, heading towards Vietnam, and so I was a EOD officer on there, and I had a chief and a second class. They'd all been through EOD school too, and we headed across, went to Subic Bay, which is by Olongapo in the Philippines, and right next to Subic Bay Naval Yard was Cuby Point Naval Air Station. So they had a dock deep enough for us, because we had a 40-foot draft on the Bennington. So we'd tied up there, and we'd be unloading different airplanes, like the Marine choppers would come off of Kaneohe in Hawaii, and we'd pick up. We had the Bennington was originally what they called a CV in that article on Monday, aircraft carrier, but it was straight, didn't have an angled deck. And after World War II, because it was built in the first part of World War II, the Essex class carrier, they put angle deck on it for takeoffs and landings, and then you had takeoffs off the bow. But it was 35 feet basically from the deck to the water. And you had a big hangar deck below and 2 elevators for the airplanes. But it was changed or converted to, before I went aboard, it was converted to what we call a CVS instead of a CVA, which is an attack carrier. We're an anti-submarine carrier. So we had S2Fs aboard that had MAD gear. That's that projection that they can stick out from the tail, magnetic air detection, to check the change in the field, magnetic field of the ocean, and detect submarines. And it had a belly radar and a 2-engine, just normal reciprocating engines. Now they have turbos on them, but then we had Navy choppers, anti-submarine choppers that had what we call dipping radar. They'd drop the radar down on a cable. They'd hover, drop it into the water to get a more precise location. And then we had ADs on there, which was a kind of a fighter plane, prop plane yet. And it had a belly radar that they could use. So we had 3 types of radar and magnetic detection amongst the Navy stuff, but we also went from Subic Bay in the Philippines over to Vietnam. We unloaded A-4 attack jets and FJ-4 Bravo Furies, and they were the fighter jets. The A-4 was basically a bomber, small bomber, attack jet. And then we had the Marines, and I don't want to go into what we did, but the Marine choppers, when we get over to Saigon or off, even up towards Bangkok and Gulf of Siam, they painted all the insignias off of all the Marine choppers, and the choppers went into Laos and Vietnam, and or part of Cambodia, and we dropped down and do IED and mine detection before they could develop a landing site. So they take our EOD team off of the carrier and take them with them. But this is before, you got to remember, Eisenhower had just left office, Kennedy had just come into office, we weren't at war, and then we did that trip twice, and on the way home we stopped at Taipei and we went up to Okinawa, and they didn't have deep enough ports or anything, so we had to anchor out. And Same with going into Hong Kong and Kowloon. And then we worked our way up to Japan. We'd go into Sasebo, which is a Marine station, and then around to Kobe, Osaka, and Yokosuka, which was a Navy supply base right south of Tokyo. And there they had dock facilities that we could tie up to. And we did this trip twice. We'd go back to Hawaii, back to San Diego, North Island, where we tied up. That was our home base. And at that time, they just opened Miramar, a naval station up on top of the hill, which is now a Marine station. And sub base was just out on Point Loma as you enter into San Diego Harbor. But North Island, they had a station there. And down, you go down the Silver Strand south of North Island. They didn't have we had to take a ferry across because they didn't have the bridge across then. Since then, I've been there several times, and we can go across the bridge. But otherwise, you had to go clear down around to Imperial Beach and work our way up through on the Silver Strand where the amphib base is and where they do SEAL training on the West Coast nowadays. But at any rate, so I made that trip twice as a EOD, Special Weapons, Nuclear Weapons Officer and diver. And one other thing, we did two types of cruising. We call independent, and when we weren't busy with flight ops, the officers had a chance to go up to the bridge and learn, start as a junior officer of the watch, work our way up to JOD, junior officer of the deck, and then to OD. And then on the second cruise, I was able to work my way up to officer of the deck formation steaming. See, independent steaming and formation steaming, you got a admiral aboard then in the Admiral Bridge down below us. And then you got a cruiser or two and destroyers with you. But independent, you're just going somewhere. So we got back to San Diego, and then we went up the coast for outfitting at Bremerton Naval Shipyard. Went into Puget Sound, down to Bremerton, and then they offloaded our team, and we went up and worked with some other Navy divers, deepening the Hood Canal for the Polaris subs. We used long Bangalore torpedoes to blast the bottom loose, so they could dredge it out. And then I got discharged.
So when you were in Subic Bay and in that area, what year was that? Was that still?
That was 1960.
I was going to guess.
Yeah, 1960.
And
then, like I say, we went back over in 61, and then we came back in 62, and then went up to Bremerton.
Being that you were there before, was war ever declared?
No.
See, that's what I was thinking. It was an undeclared.
Never declared.
How do you refer to
Well,
that?
I was going to I'll show you over there in the paperwork when you are in the reserves or when you're discharged from active duty or discharged from the reserves, they issue what we call a DD-214. And that shows your service record and any honors or medals you've won and so forth. Mm-hmm. So here I was back here in 1974 teaching up at MSU, which started out when I came back as Mankato State University, and then later on it was at Minnesota State. But at any rate, all of a sudden in 1974, I got a DD-215, which was a updated version of a DD-214, and all of a sudden down there in my awards, I'll show you, it shows all my service medals. And that, you got to remember now that I left there in 62. And that was in 74. I was finally awarded my Vietnam service stuff. But because I had stayed in the reserves all this time, and I scrambled up my anniversary year, so it took me 27 years to get my 20 satisfactory for retirement. Mm-hmm. So I've got TRICARE for life now. And at any rate, it was really kind of amazing when I got that DD-215 that showed that they'd finally recognized that there were people over there before the Vietnam conflict officially started, which started in about 65. Do you know how the whole thing started in the first place?
I do.
Okay. Eisenhower took over for the French in Dien Bien Phu in 54. You don't have to put this down. But at any rate, then he formed an organization called SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which included Australia, South Korea, because we'd already fought the Korean War, and India and Australia. And we're all in this group called SEATO. And he, as the French pulled out of what they used to call French Indochina, Vietnam, they pulled out, we moved in. Well, you had two basic groups in Vietnam. North Vietnam, run out of Hai Phong. South Vietnam was run by a Catholic dictator by the name of Diem. And Diem overtaxed the poor people until they couldn't take it anymore and sent all of his money to Switzerland, where his family lived. And the population rebelled. They formed the Viet Cong. And then gradually Kennedy just got deeper and deeper into it, and then Johnson got even deeper. And then it finally was pretty well over by 73. And I was back here teaching then, and I was in the student demonstrations back then and stuff. I was involved with a vets club at the college.
When it comes to your military career, ranking it with others, like your career as a professor, your research, where would you rank the...
Well, I was a lieutenant commander when I retired. Now, that's an interesting story. I'd been passed over for full commander 6 years in a row. Well, I got to know one of the admirals in the cities that I knew was going to be on the selection committee back in Washington. And I told him, I says, when you go back there, I says, look through and find out why in the hell I keep getting passed over. Came back. In fact, he had a boat over on the Mississippi. And he says, Ballard, he says, I'll tell you why. He says, you started a new organization down there at college called the VVAW, Vietnam Vets Against the War. He said, all they need to do is see that on your page 13 and you're dead. I mean, you could stay where you're at, but you weren't going to get promoted any further. We loved what we did in EOD. All the sailors loved what they did. That's what military people do. You like what you do. That doesn't mean you agree with the whole policy. And, you know, gradually, as I got further and further away from this period of time, like I say, I was involved with the Vets Club. In fact, I ended up as their faculty advisor. But I also started this new little organization called VVAW that got me killed for further promotion. And that's just the way it is, you know? you gotta go with your heart sometimes. Down there, and protested. You know, we didn't belong over there. Now, that wasn't meant that they were bad guys, but we were fighting for the good guy, or the bad guy too. They're all bad guys. The Diem family ripped off all their.
And that's who the U.S. was supporting?
Yes.
At that,
Yes.
in the very,
The
very...
French had supported him. They pulled out of Dien Bien Phu, was the kind of the treaty point where Icahn dealt with the French in '54. They left, and then everything became kind of rebellious, and you started developing Viet Cong groups and anti-Diem groups. So they were fighting against their own people, so we ended up fighting for Diem.
So I had...
So wouldn't you vote against that?